David held the glass of whiskey as his eyes wandered around the party hall. The glimmer of lights reflected off the elegant chandeliers, and the muffled sound of conversations blended with the soft music that filled the atmosphere. Beside him, Grace smiled serenely, as she always did at company events. David still felt somewhat uncomfortable at parties like this, even being the host and, of course, the CEO of the company. However, in that moment, something diverted David's attention. He spotted across the room a familiar face that mentally took him back in time. Jennifer. She was there, laughing and gesturing with that air of superiority he knew all too well. Next to her stood a taller man with a rigid posture, speaking with exaggerated confidence. David knew who they were: Jennifer, his former schoolmate, and Isaac, her husband, a director at a large local institution. The years had not been kind to David during his school days. He never forgot the disdainful looks Jennifer used to throw at him. She always made a point of reminding everyone that David came from a humble family and that his father was just a laborer. While the others flaunted what they had, David worked temporary jobs to help at home. Jennifer, with all her luxury and disdain, embodied the people who hurt him the most back then. Grace, noticing that something had changed in her husband's expression, leaned closer to him, lightly touching his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked with a tone of tenderness. "Yeah, I'm fine," David replied with a light smile, though his eyes were still fixed on Jennifer. It wasn't long before Jennifer noticed him too. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, as if she were trying to remember where she knew him from, until a mocking smile spread across her face. She whispered something to Isaac, who looked directly at David, and they both walked towards him. "David?" Jennifer approached, with that same arrogant tone from years ago. "I can't believe it. It's been so long, hasn't it?" She looked at Grace with curiosity, but her attention quickly returned to David. "Jennifer, it's good to see you," David replied, keeping his voice steady and cordial, though her presence began to bring back memories he would rather forget. "So, what have you been up to?" she asked, though it was obvious that her interest was not genuine. Isaac, standing beside her, crossed his arms with a slight smirk of disdain. David could have answered in many ways, but he chose to remain discreet. "I'm working in the tech field." Isaac let out a muffled laugh. "In the tech field, huh? We imagined you'd be doing something more manual." Jennifer stepped forward, ignoring David's subtle attempt to end the conversation. "Well, either way, you seem to be doing well. I mean, considering where you came from, it's admirable that you've landed a decent job. But of course, some of us were always destined for great things, right?" Grace tightened her grip on David's arm, as if trying to convey calm. David took a deep breath. He didn't feel angry, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing what was about to come. Jennifer continued talking, almost disregarding Grace, and with every sentence she spoke, it felt like David's years of resentment were bubbling back to the surface. He had spent so long striving to be more than the poor kid that she and others loved to belittle. And now, there she was, without a clue about who he had really become. David simply smiled and took a sip of his whiskey. Jennifer's malicious words no longer had the same impact. He knew that very soon, all that arrogance would dissipate. As Jennifer and Isaac began to walk away, satisfied with what they presumed to be a subtle humiliation, David felt the moment drawing near. Maintaining his composure, he looked at Grace, who, with a slight smile, just nodded, understanding that he was about to turn the tables. The night continued, and the glow in the hall seemed to intensify the contrast between David's and Jennifer's realities. He watched from a distance as she mingled with the other guests, laughing loudly and exuding her usual confidence, unaware of what was about to happen. Isaac, by her side, displayed the same haughty demeanor, chatting with other company directors as if he were an essential part of that elite. Grace, always perceptive, whispered softly, "They really have no idea, do they?" David smiled, this time more relaxed. "No, but soon that's going to change." Minutes later, one of the company assistants approached David, informing him that the awards ceremony was about to begin. He nodded, handed the glass to Grace, and walked toward the stage, aware that all eyes, including those of Jennifer and Isaac, would soon be on him. When his name was announced, attention in the hall immediately turned to the center of the stage. The murmurs ceased, and with unwavering confidence, David stepped onto the stage to polite applause. Those claps were for him, the CEO, a position that many still did not associate with his simple image. Jennifer and Isaac, standing farther back, froze. The surprise was instantaneous. Jennifer, who had just mocked David moments before, was wide-eyed, unable to process what she was seeing. Isaac, who had spent the evening scoffing at David's position, stood still, his face hardened by the humiliation that was beginning to form. David took the microphone and, for a moment, surveyed the crowd with a calm gaze. He thanked the team, praised the employees, and then paused subtly. His eyes found Jennifer's, now visibly uncomfortable, and he allowed the silence to speak for itself. This company was built on hard work, perseverance, and the belief that everyone, regardless of where they came from, has the right to grow and reach their potential. For me personally, it is an honor to lead this team, which reflects these values. He took a brief pause, observing the reactions around him. Jennifer, pale, tried to hide her nervousness, while Isaac kept his fists clenched. "Unfortunately, some people still do not understand these principles," David continued, now directly addressing the area where the couple stood. "And for that reason, certain changes will need to be made." Jennifer began to stare at David with a confused expression, while Isaac, despite trying to maintain a facade of indifference, knew that something was about to happen. The air was thick, and David could feel that he had captured everyone's attention in the hall. "This company values respect, teamwork, and humility. Those who do not align with these values have no space here." David was now looking directly at Isaac. "And for that reason tonight, it is my duty to inform you that we have made the difficult decision to let go of some team members who clearly do not reflect what we believe." The hall was in total silence, all eyes fixed on the stage. Isaac's name was not mentioned, but it was as clear as day that he was the target. David's words carried weight, and Isaac's fall, though unspoken, was already sealed. Jennifer appeared paralyzed, unable to absorb the revelation. Her husband, the man she had taken pride in being married to, had just been placed in the center of one of the most humiliating moments of their lives. Grace, watching closely, noticed the slight tremor in Jennifer's hands. The pride that once seemed unshakable was now crumbling. The years of arrogance collided with reality, and what had once seemed like a joke was now transforming into a real nightmare. David concluded his speech with a thank you to the team, making it clear that changes were coming and that those who remained would do so by merit and values. He stepped down from the stage amid applause and muffled conversations. As he passed by Jennifer and Isaac, their eyes crossed again, but this time, David's expression was one of unshakable serenity. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. Jennifer tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Isaac, in shock, simply turned his face away, too weak to face what had just happened. David did not stop. He moved forward with Grace by his side, and they walked away from the scene, leaving the couple to deal with the weight of the situation. The fall had begun, and the arrogance that had once sustained Jennifer and Isaac no longer served them. Jennifer was sitting on the sofa in her living room, the space illuminated only by the soft light filtering through the heavy curtains. The silence was almost deafening. Isaac, on the other side of the room, paced back and forth, phone in hand, trying to make calls that had thus far only resulted in rejections and closed doors. The dismissal had been devastating for both of them. The shine of success that had always surrounded Jennifer and Isaac had vanished in the blink of an eye, like a house of cards collapsing without warning. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, her voice heavy with frustration and fear, something she rarely showed. Isaac looked at her, his eyes filled with fury but also with helplessness. "I've tried to talk to some contacts. Everyone pretends they can't do anything. David, he ruined us." Jennifer stood up, agitated. She couldn't believe that her life, once so comfortable and perfect, was on the brink of collapse. Everything she had built, all her certainties, had been destroyed that night. She looked around at the house, decorated with such luxury, and felt that everything was slipping through her fingers. "This can't be happening," she murmured to herself. "I can't live like this. I won't." Isaac stopped and approached her, visible anger on his face. "You think I don't know? You think I'm not doing everything I can?" The tension between them, which had once been veiled, began to overflow. "You got into this mess when you started flirting with him at that party. You thought he was just poor David, but now look at us." Jennifer stared at him, incredulous. "Me? You're blaming me for this? You were there laughing along. Don't pretend you didn't share the same arrogance, Isaac." The argument heated up, but soon dissipated into a cold silence, the kind of silence that indicated there was nothing more to say. They both knew they were on the brink of losing everything. Weeks passed, and the couple's financial situation worsened drastically. Isaac lost his influential contacts, and the market seemed closed to someone like him, marked by a humiliating layoff. Desperate to maintain appearances, Jennifer began selling her most valuable possessions, but soon realized there was no way to sustain the lifestyle they had. The house, once a symbol of status, was put up for sale. Within months, they moved into a small, unremarkable apartment, far from the luxury and grandeur they were accustomed to. The sparkle in Jennifer's eyes had completely vanished. She, who had always had control over her life and choices, was now just a shadow of her former self. The divorce was inevitable. The constant tension, the frustration of a crumbling life, eroded what little remained of their relationship. Both of their prides would not allow them to acknowledge that they were ruined, and the only solution, for them, was to separate. Isaac found a job as a worker in a local factory, a humble and exhausting job. He, who once led teams, now spent his days in silence, following orders. The irony of his new reality did not go unnoticed. He, who had so despised David in the past, was now living the life he had once ridiculed. Jennifer, for her part, tried everything to reclaim her life of luxury, but the doors were closed to her. Without Isaac's support, without their old friends, who quickly disappeared when the fortune dwindled, she found herself alone in a small apartment, living a life she had never imagined for herself. Isolation and modesty consumed her daily, every time she looked around and saw the glaring difference between what she was and what she had become. The lonely nights dragged on, and the feeling of emptiness was unbearable. She remembered the party, the moment everything began to crumble. The image of David on stage, with that serene and powerful look, echoed incessantly in her mind. The woman who had always prided herself on being at the top now lived at the bottom of a pit she had helped dig for herself. But pride, the same that had accompanied her throughout her life, wouldn't let her admit the depth of her fall. Jennifer still wondered how everything had gone so wrong, and if she would ever be able to rise again from what seemed to be rock bottom. Life continued its course, but for her, everything felt stagnant, trapped in a cycle of regrets and solitude. Years passed with a devastating weight for Jennifer, but she barely felt time slipping away. In her now modest life, the days seemed the same, silent, purposeless, filled with regret. Isaac was no longer a constant presence. The divorce had sealed their definitive separation, and he moved on with his life in an even more distant manner, trying to find some meaning while working at the factory. Jennifer, on the other hand, was trapped, unable to break free from the memories of a life of wealth and status that, for her, seemed to be the only true value. Then, one afternoon, when she least expected it, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was unknown, yet respectful. Isaac wanted to see her. She hesitated before agreeing to the meeting. Isaac, who now lived an even harsher reality than hers, seemed to have transformed. When she met him again, she no longer saw the arrogant man from before. He looked exhausted, but there was something new in his eyes, a humility that Jennifer didn't recognize, yet it deeply unsettled her. "I wanted to apologize," Isaac began, with a tone he had never used before. "For everything we did, for how we acted. We both let ourselves get carried away, and I was blind. We were arrogant and thought the world revolved around us." Jennifer remained silent, unable to immediately process the words she was hearing. Was he really apologizing? Something that had never happened in all the years they had been together? Isaac continued, "I lost everything, and that made me realize that what I had wasn't real. It wasn't a real life. But I had time to reflect and understand what really matters." He paused, looking her in the eyes. "I looked for David." The name David made Jennifer's heart race. "You looked for him? Why?" she asked, trying to hide the mix of anxiety and curiosity in her voice. Isaac sighed, as if that gesture summed up his entire journey up to that point. "I apologized. I needed to do it not just for myself, but for us, for what we've become. And you know what he did?" Isaac looked at Jennifer with a faint smile of surprise and sadness. "He forgave me. Not only that, he offered me a second chance." Jennifer felt a wave of conflicting emotions. She had always imagined that David would be the kind of man who, having risen to the top, would seize every opportunity to crush those who once humiliated him. But this revelation not only shocked her but also disarmed her. David's compassion was something she didn't understand, something she had never experienced in her own life. "David forgave you?" she repeated, still in disbelief. Isaac nodded. "He wasn't like us, Jennifer. He never was. And in a way, I'm grateful for that. He gave me the chance to start over and I accepted. But now I want you to know that for me, things have changed. I'm no longer trying to go back to the life we had. I just wanted you to know that I'm at peace with what happened." Jennifer tried to process those words. She had never thought about peace. For her, it was always about winning, about being on top, about having more. But Isaac, he seemed to have found something more valuable. "I don't know what to do with that," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't know how to move forward." Isaac looked at her with compassion. "You don't need to know now. Just think about it. Sometimes, what we think we need is what holds us back." He stood up, ready to leave, but before he went, he cast her one last look. "Maybe it's time for you to look for David too." After Isaac left, Jennifer sat in her small apartment, reflecting on those words. She couldn't imagine the idea of lowering herself to seek out David, to admit that she had failed. Yet there was something inside her, something she had never felt before. It was the weight of the truth. Not the truth she had always hidden, but the truth that she was alone, broken, and that her life, which she had valued so much, was an empty shell. Maybe Isaac was right. Maybe it was time to try a new approach, to seek something deeper than status or power. In the days that followed, that idea began to haunt her. Each time she remembered Isaac's words, she felt even more cornered by her own choices. Finally, one morning, after a long period of hesitation, Jennifer decided that she would do something she had never imagined. She would go to David. Not to reclaim what she had lost, but, for the first time in her life, to ask for forgiveness. The journey to that decision was painful, and she knew the encounter would be even more difficult. Jennifer stood in front of the large building where David worked. Her hands were sweating, her heart racing. She wasn't ready to face what was to come, but there was no turning back now. Each step she took felt like a confrontation with her pride, and the feeling that her old life was completely out of reach weighed heavily on her shoulders. Upon entering, Jennifer barely recognized the woman she once was. The arrogant confidence, the sparkle of someone who dominated parties and events, all of that seemed distant now. She was just someone seeking redemption, something she never thought she would need. At the reception, an assistant greeted her with a neutral look. "How can I help you?" "I came to see Mr. David," Jennifer replied, her voice hesitant, almost a whisper. She expected to be rejected, for the assistant to simply say that he was busy or that he didn't see visitors without an appointment. However, to her surprise, after a brief check, the assistant asked her to wait. Jennifer sat down, her heart beating faster and faster. Was it possible that David would see her? What would he think of her now, after everything that had happened? Minutes felt like hours until the door to David's office opened. He was there, standing, and his eyes met hers. There was no bitterness in his expression, but there was also none of the warmth of an old friendship. Just a calmness that Jennifer couldn't decipher. "Jennifer," he said, gesturing for her to enter. She stood up, almost trembling, and walked toward the office. As she entered, she felt the weight of their shared history. David settled behind his desk, while she remained standing for a moment, unsure. He pointed to a chair. "Sit down," he said in a calm but firm voice. Jennifer obeyed. The words she had prepared in her mind seemed to escape her, and the silence between them stretched into seconds that felt endless. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost lacking confidence. "David, I don't even know how to start. She paused, feeling the weight of what she needed to say. "I made a lot of mistakes. I was cruel. And at the party, I mocked you without knowing who you were. And even if I had known, I was horrible." David watched her attentively, not saying a word, just allowing her to speak. He seemed to be waiting for something more. Jennifer took a deep breath, tears beginning to threaten to spill. "The truth is, I lost everything. Isaac and we got divorced, and I find myself with nothing now. And it feels like everything I thought mattered. That whole life I lived was never real. I realize now how petty I was, how small I was." She looked at him, desperate to find some sign of understanding, but David remained silent, giving her the space to continue. "Isaac told me he came to see you, and that you forgave him." The words came out like a trembling sigh. "And I don't have the right to ask for the same, I know. But I'm here because I needed to say I'm sorry. And that you always were better than I could perceive." David leaned a little forward, his eyes fixed on hers, and finally spoke. "Jennifer, you're here now. That's already more than I could have expected from you in the past. And what you went through, I have no anger. I never did. What happened between us in school, and even at the party, was part of who you were. I understand that now." She felt a relief, even though her words were still heavy with guilt. "But I can't change what you lived or what you lost," David continued with a gentle firmness. "Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never imagined. Sometimes, what we want most is for everything to go back to how it was before, but that rarely happens. The truth is, Jennifer, you need to find your own way now." Jennifer looked down, the tears finally streaming down her face. She knew David was right. There was no way to turn back time, and the life she so desperately fought to reclaim no longer existed. "I know, and I don't expect anything from you," she said, her voice choked. "I just wanted To start somewhere. David got up, walked over to where she was sitting, and extended his hand to her. You've already started, Jennifer. Now, what you do with it is up to you. She took his hand, feeling a mix of shame and gratitude. That simple gesture meant more than any words. For the first time in years, she felt a real chance to move forward, even though the path was still uncertain. Jennifer left David's office with the weight of the past still present, but with a new perception of herself and what truly mattered. David hadn't humiliated her, hadn't sought revenge as she had feared. Instead, he showed her that there was a life possible beyond pride and pretense, and for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face this new reality. Jennifer stepped out of David's office feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. His words echoed in her mind. Now, what you do with it is up to you. She knew her life had changed forever, but this time, it wasn't just the emptiness of loss that consumed her. There was a small spark of hope, something she barely recognized, but that now gave her the strength to move on. Days passed with a different rhythm. She began to search for a new meaning in her life. Without the luxuries and status that had once defined her, Jennifer needed to rediscover herself. The process wasn't quick or easy. She had to confront every regret, every wrong choice, and learn to live with the consequences of her former arrogance. Eventually, Jennifer managed to get a modest job at a small clothing store. At first, shame overwhelmed her. She, who had always prided herself on her social standing, was now on the other side, serving people who, once, might have mocked her. However, with each passing day, she learned something new about humility and value. She learned to listen to others, to deal with her frustrations, and above all, to accept who she truly was without the masks she had worn for so long. One afternoon, while organizing some pieces in the store, she felt a familiar presence. When she looked up, she saw Grace, David's wife, standing in the doorway. Jennifer froze, surprised. Grace entered the store with the same gentle smile she always carried, and Jennifer, for a moment, didn't know what to say. "Hi, Jennifer. How are you?" Grace asked, her voice soft, without any hint of judgment. Jennifer hesitated before answering. I'm okay. I mean, better than I was." Grace nodded, looking satisfied with the answer. "I'm glad to hear that. You seem different." Jennifer smiled, a shy smile, lacking the sparkle of before but filled with sincerity. "I've changed. I think I needed to change." Grace observed her for a few moments before speaking again. "David told me about your meeting. He worried about you. He always believed you could find your way if you wanted to." Jennifer felt a lump in her throat. Did David really care about her? After everything she had done, did he still care? "I don't know how to thank you. You and him. He was. More than I deserved." Grace smiled again, this time with evident compassion. "We all make mistakes, Jennifer. What matters is what we do after them. And you are here, living your new life. That is already something grand." They talked for a few more minutes, and before leaving, Grace made an unexpected offer. "We are starting a mentoring program at David's company. He wants to help people who, like he did in the past, were underestimated or simply need a second chance. I think you would be a great mentor." Jennifer was left speechless. The idea of working alongside David, helping others, seemed surreal. She, who had so belittled and despised the paths of others, would now have the chance to help someone grow. I don't even know what to say," Jennifer stammered. "I don't think I deserve an opportunity like this." Grace stepped closer and, with a firm gesture, placed her hand on Jennifer's shoulder. "You deserve it. Everyone deserves a second chance." In the days that followed, Jennifer accepted Grace's offer. Working in the mentoring program was a transformative experience. She found purpose in helping others overcome their difficulties and build a future, something she herself was doing. There was no longer a need to hide behind masks or luxury. She was finally starting to find peace within herself, knowing that her worth was not in titles or possessions, but in what she could do for others. During this process, Jennifer also witnessed Isaac's transformation, who was now working at David's company. He had found redemption in his humility, and slowly, the two began to rebuild a kind of friendship they had never had before. It was no longer about the past or what they had lost, but about what they were building in their new lives. The real turning point came when Jennifer received an unexpected invitation. David and Grace were organizing a big celebration to mark the success of the mentoring program. It was a party to thank everyone who had contributed to the growth of the initiative. Jennifer hesitated to go, fearing that returning to that environment might reignite old ghosts. But in the end, she decided she needed to close that chapter. On the night of the party, she arrived at the venue feeling the weight of the occasion. She entered the hall with a different posture, not the old Jennifer who sought to be the center of attention, but someone who now understood the value of respect, kindness, and a second chance. David, upon seeing her, approached. "I'm glad you came." Jennifer smiled sincerely. "I needed to. And I wanted to thank you for everything." He nodded. "You did your part, Jennifer. What you've built since that night is admirable." They exchanged few words, but there was something deep in that encounter. There was no more resentment, nor shadows of what had happened in the past. Jennifer finally felt that her journey was complete, and most importantly, she now knew she was capable of starting over. Looking around, she saw Isaac engaged in conversation, Grace smiling next to David, and several other people who, like her, were on a path of reconstruction. Jennifer left the party that night without needing applause or approval. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. Life, in a way she had never imagined, had given her something that money or status could never provide, a true redemption. And more importantly, she now understood what David had known for so long, that success is not in what you have, but in what you do with the second chances life offers you. We hope you enjoyed this narrative. Help us by leaving your like and subscribing to the channel so you won't miss more emotional stories that touch the soul. Share your ideas and experiences in the comments. We would love to know what you think. Thanks and criticisms are also welcome. See you in the next emotional video. Until then,